Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get going. Grace, can you stop sharing your screen? As in our last session, I am just delighted to say this. The PPNA staff are delighted that many of our board members are really moderating our first annual Southside Summit this year. And as a result, you're going to hear more from Shanae Herbert tonight than myself. But she is wonderful. She is amazing. She's newly elected board member to PPNA. And so I'm going to turn it over to her. Shanae, thank you for being with us tonight and leading this discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Like Tabitha said, my name is Shanae Herbert. I'm a newly elected PPNA board member. In my day job, I actually am a parent. I'm a Northsider, and I work in PPNA with IX, and I do some work with Can Do. And for my full-time job, I'm actually the Healing Justice Program Director of St. Paul in AFSC. I've been in education for a long time, so I'm just as interested in hearing the panelists today. We've put together a really amazing program for you all tonight, so I thank you all for joining us and hearing the conversation and engaging in this way where you could choose to be anywhere. You've chosen to be here with us tonight, so I thank you for that. I want to just briefly walk you through the agenda. Like I said, we have some really interesting, and this is going to be an action-packed time where we hear from our panelists. They'll get to describe who they are and the organizations that they work for and how they have engaged community in this work. And after we hear from each panelist, we'll get a chance to, I'll have about 3 questions that I'll be asking them, and then I'll open it up for you all to ask questions and engage the panelists in things maybe you're curious about in terms of how it relates to your community or your work. And we have note takers on the call, so I'm encouraging you all to really participate and make this an interactive time by using your chat, as well as we have Jendai, who's on the call, that's going to be a graphic note taker. You'll see him taking notes, and I encourage you to use the chat if you want him to annotate what you said through the chat function as well. And that's how we'll kind of move along. We're going to get you out in time so that you can enjoy the rest of your evening, but that's how we're going to organize this meeting tonight. So I want to have our panelists introduce themselves, but I'll give you just a brief introduction to who they are, and then give them the opportunity to really explain and dive deep into who they are. First, we have Miss Sarah Washington. She is the co-chair of the Special Education Advisory Council of Minneapolis Public Schools. Then we have Kearry Wayne Saffold and Reginald Prince from KWST, I believe it's pronounced KWST Behavioral Development Group, and they're here today. So if I could have Miss Washington take herself off of mute and begin to introduce herself. The panelists each have about 10 minutes to talk about who they are. And so after Miss Washington, then I'll introduce Kearry and Reggie.
So I am Sarah Washington, and I am the co-chair of the Special Education Advisory Council. I have 4 grandkids and 1 on the way. And let's see, I am originally from the North Side. I moved over south. I wanted something different, but I ended up moving right around the time of Mr. George Floyd's death. So that was really new to me and the whole excitement. I also do other things with NPS. I'm also on their mental health district task force. I'm also on the Hennepin County Child Crisis. I also serve on the Parent Catalyst Leadership Group. I'm a newly board member for Watercourse Counseling Service. I also sit on the early childhood team. I'm also on the school-based team. So those are some of the things that I do. And so I want to tell you guys a little bit about SEAC. So if you can go to my next slide. Oh, before we get to that part, I've been advocating for many years for my family and other families. My daughter has developmental disability, and I've been her guardian when she turned 18. So that was really new to me and a lot of work. So I've been advocating, and my lovely friend who is the associate superintendent says, now you are like the parent engagement specialist, because I love getting parents engaged and I love doing things to make sure that all parents is at the table and getting their voices out. So with SEAC, our mission is to increase the involvement and add the informed perspective of parents and families of children with disabilities, and in the making of the implementation of district policies to identify and promote the common concerns of special education and non-special education kids alike, of students alike, to fulfill the requirements of Minnesota Statute 125A24. So we'll go on to the next slide. And if I talk too fast, please let me know. So my role, but let me tell you about this picture. So that is the Associate Superintendent, Rochelle Cox, and she's there because she's also the Executive Director for Special Ed. This woman, when I say I have the craziest ideals for parent engagement, she's like, okay, let's do it. And so I chose that picture because she is a big part of SEAC. So my role, what I do is I put together the agenda, I facilitate the meeting. So when things can get a little, sometimes things can get a little out of hand, so I kind of reroute parents. I get out to schools and I promote the mission. I always invite parents to come to our meetings. I go and I talk about the advisory council. I ensure other parents' voices are at the table. And so what I do is I have a leadership meeting in like July to plan the yearly topics. And then I send it to Associate Superintendent Cox, and she gets the other directors together and they plan their topics. And then I answer questions and emails from parents. If we can go to the next slide, please. And so our priority on equity is to be more inclusive. So what I did a couple years ago, I changed the bylaws because in different cultures, grandmothers raise the kids. And so I rewrote the bylaws so it can say grandparents and family members of kids with disabilities. We make sure that every disability is represented. For a long time, it was this all white group. And there was nothing wrong with that, but then it was. So I made it to where we didn't have just autism. I wanted all disabilities to be shown, and I want everyone to be on, have a fair chance. We also make sure we got interpreters for parents. And as you see at the bottom, diversity lifts up different perspectives. So we don't want the same old thing. We want everyone to feel heard, and we want it to be very diverse. And if you can go on to the next slide. So we do a lot of teamwork. We are a team. We just had a meeting, and I'm so proud of all those directors. We pulled together like two true champs. I mean, we had a couple people who didn't agree, but I mean, we navigated and worked it out. So we have monthly leadership meetings. We also plan resource fairs together, which our next virtual resource fair is March 6th. And it is virtual. And if you guys would like to know more, I can send that link to Miss Ashley or Tabitha, and she can share it with you guys. So we just work as a team. We do monthly leadership meetings, and we always talk maybe 20 minutes before the meetings to make sure we're on the same page. Next slide, please. And so since the pandemic and George Floyd, we have been virtual, and we have been really pulling together, making sure we have interpreters to join every meeting, and making sure that everyone is understanding how to navigate the virtual Thursday monthly meetings. And since George Floyd's murder, we have become mindful, we have become more understanding and more inclusive and more welcoming. And as we get into things with the question and answers, I can talk about ways that Minneapolis has become more inclusive and been working on some things to support all families and all their staff. And that's about it for SEAC.
Thank you so much, Ms. Washington. It is so important, the work that you do to engage parents. I know firsthand, like sometimes walking in schools, and even I've been in education and working with young people for so long, I know how intimidating it could be. So it's refreshing that parent engagement is becoming more inclusive of more parents, because I believe more parents at the table, we are able to make a difference for our students. So thank you. And right now we would like to have Kearry, Saffold, and Reggie Prince talk about their work with Quest and the Behavioral Development Group.
Well, thank you for having us. I am Kearry Wayne Saffold. I am the president of Quest Behavioral Development Group. I'm also a husband. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I have a 22-year-old son, a 15-year-old son, a 4-year-old daughter, and I have a 1-year-old granddaughter. And they're all under my roof right now for 9 months because my daughter-in-law was recently deployed to Korea. So I'm asking all prayer warriors, heavy meditators, and heavy thinkers to keep me in mind. I'm here with my partner, Reginald Prince. If you would just introduce yourself really quick, brother, and then we'll go into the slides.
All right, so my name is Reginald Prince. They call me Reggie. I am the vice president of Quest, and my role, my process really began with my relationship with Kearry. Prior to meeting Kearry several years ago, we were actually put into an office together, a tiny office, and if you knew how big we both were, you'd understand the context of that. And through that, I was able to learn, really grow in my awareness around the struggles of our people within the school system, especially. And so who I am and where I am is really a lot of it because of my relationship with Kearry. And I'll let Kearry go ahead and walk us through at least the foundations of our agency.
All right, thank you for that. Now, what you all are looking at now is a picture of my late father. And he's also the name that we named our organization after. So his name was Kenneth Wayne Saffold. So Quest is an acronym that stands for Kenneth Wayne Saffold Targeted Behavioral Development Group. And we are very intentional about the T, targeted, because we like to say that we are willing to fit whatever need is there for whatever organization or whatever services that may be needed at any time. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Now, the history of Quest Behavioral Development Group, I believe, started in 1986. Now, our mission is centered around addressing the overrepresentation that marginalized children, more specifically Black boys, are being pushed into special education services without needing the services. Now, I feel crazy that I have to say this, but I'm always intentional about saying it. Of course, if a child needs services, we want them to get those services. But what I saw as an educator was too many people, too many marginalized children being pushed into that category without actually needing the services. And like I said, I think we started in 1986, my second grade year, where I was going to Lincoln Elementary School in North Minneapolis. I had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Kinney. I'll never forget her. It's actually therapeutic to say her name at the age of 42. But I can honestly tell you all that Miss Kinney didn't like me. She didn't like me, and she didn't like about 5 or 6 of my friends at the time. And so much so that she requested to my parents that I be evaluated for special education by way of emotional behavior disorder. I had the kind of advocacy parents that just wasn't going to go for that. So I didn't get the label. And just moving forward some years ahead, my youngest son, when he was in kindergarten, going to a very good, high-performing school in St. Paul, his teacher approached my wife and I about having him evaluated for special education. And of course, we denied, and we switched schools, and he's been on the honor roll ever since. So moving forward, I had a job as an African-American student liaison for a local first ring suburb. And it was at this particular job that I feel like the system kind of let me peek behind the curtains and really see what was going on with this issue. Part of my role as a liaison was to be there as an advocate for families that were having issues with navigating the educational system, and being overrepresented in special education, as well as being suspended and expelled from schools at much higher rates than their counterparts. And I will never forget, like, struggling at my job, like really feeling like, okay, I have a college degree now. I'm about to go in here and I'm about to have this impact that I know I was created for, and I just kept getting hit with a bunch of red tape. And I spoke to a mentor of mine one day. We were out for lunch, and he told me, he was like, boy, if you ever want to have the kind of impact that you're looking to have, you're going to have to work outside of the system. And it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. So that's what I sought out to do. If you can go to the next slide, please. Then I met old Reggie Prince. And like he said, we worked together at a local nonprofit organization for 2 years together. In a very small room, had a lot of different conversations about the organization that we were working at the time, kind of some frustrations that we were having with just the educational terrain for our babies. And we looked at each other one day and said, let's quit. And that's what we did. He quit on Tuesday. I think I was out that Thursday. And it's just been a rewarding experience to take on this issue. And that's kind of the historical context of how Quest began. I'm gonna give the microphone to Reggie so he can talk a little bit about our programs and other things that we offer.
Go ahead and move the slide forward, please. And thank you, Kearry. So when we talk about why we exist, I mean, the slide is showing you a bunch of evidence as to why we target the EBD label, right? I mean, it's basically the access ramp to the school to prison pipeline. Like, the earlier a child get that label, the more likely it is that they're twice as likely to be homeless, justice involved in some kind of institution or treatment facility at the age of 18, right? They're 13 times more likely to be engaged in some kind of criminal or justice involvement within the school system. It's a great thing that Minneapolis Public Schools pulled the cops out of the school, and yet what we're finding is, because of the social distancing, a lot of these issues have diminished, and so they've pushed them to the side because they don't have to deal with them directly. But all of these characteristics, all these stats still hold fast. And as soon as we get back to school, we know that they're going to exist. So I won't go through all of them, but just keep in mind that the reason why we began and started this process is really because it's the beginning of the school to prison pipeline. Now, through our initial development and our evolution, we've recognized we moved beyond just Black boys, and we started looking at marginalized groups as well. So we've expanded our scope, but we still keep that primary focus of really being able to engage the parents and help the youth regulate themselves, and also working within the school. So go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll talk about the approach that we take. Our approach is rooted in this thing called acceptance. Now, this is really driven by a principle and a practice called motivational interviewing. But within it, it's just this idea that everybody has inherent worth, right? A lot of our kids get pushed to the side quickly based on just whatever biases, whatever reason. We work within the school system to actually teach educators how to work cross-culturally, embracing this concept. So that's one of the areas that we really push through. We also teach all of our staff, and we have a good number of part-time staff and mentors to actually embrace this same concept. So you can go ahead and stop sharing. I just want to talk for a minute. So now, as a whole, what we do to try to engage the community, first and foremost, we work with the parents. We teach them how to advocate for their kids in an appropriate way. We all know that there's a trespass list at every school that gets filled quickly, right? And if you went down the list, that list is Black and brown, and more than likely it's darker the longer the list gets. So we teach them how to show up in a way that's effective for their kids. And beyond just teaching them a way of being with the school system, we've grabbed several parents and helped them to be able to educate other parents. So we did a train-the-trainer model to where they learned how to teach other parents how to actually go to school and advocate for their kids effectively. And it's through a real meaningful process. It's not a discussion. We actually do role plays and really engage in cognitive restructuring with the parents and teach them skills to be able to manage themselves in that environment, but also be able to have more confidence in their parenting at home, right? How to set age-appropriate rules within their home, and how to really involve themselves in their kids' academic performance, and really draw other people into that process so that they can have the same empowerment. Beyond that, like I said, we work with the kids. We teach them how to regulate their emotions. And you would imagine that at certain ages, there are some limitations. And yet, even down to elementary school, we can teach things like social skills and other behavioral modification techniques to really help them be able to show up properly and engage in the learning process so they can increase their academic performance. And the last thing that we do, and I shouldn't say the last, but another primary role of our organization is we started doing professional development. Now, this began in, I would say, outside school districts, the suburban school districts, but then it was drawn in by the same wonderful lady, Miss Rochelle Cox. It started with at Harrison Learning Center, which at the time that we began at Harrison Learning Center, that place was at every school board meeting discussed to shut it down. So in the course of our 2+ years of being there, we've been able to engage the staff and really being able to do some real reflective self-awareness to develop some real tangible skills on how to work cross-culturally and actually how to team build and really have some really honest, meaningful conversations through the process of teaching them the skill of being able to show empathy toward one another, to be able to set appropriate boundaries with themselves, their peers, and with the kids and things along those nature. And then that has been broadened out into special ed as a whole. We were actually able to begin the school year as part of the school year's kickoff by holding a seminar to help raise awareness as to why, within the actual staff, why these disparities exist and strategies to be able to mitigate or reduce those disparities among African Americans and marginalized kids as a whole. So that's our programs. Those are the things we do. The main way we engage the community is by building up parents and then giving them the skills to build up their peers around them, because we're just two men and we can fight and scratch as hard as we want, but we'll broaden our scope. We'll build a wider net by giving people the same knowledge that we have and showing them not just what it is to advocate for yourself and for your students, but teaching them how to teach others how to do the exact same thing using our model. So that's Quest in a nutshell. Any questions? Or better yet, sorry, back to our moderator.
Reggie, I don't mind if you moderate this.
Nah, I apologize.
Can I say something?
Ahead of myself there.
Can I say something to Reggie?
Yes, please.
When you said Harrison, I lit up. I'm also on their site council, and Harrison is doing amazing work.
Oh, yeah.
So when you said Harrison, I almost flipped out my chair because I almost wore my shirt today, but I had to be cute in my dress. But yes, honey.
and I want to be clear about that in a sense. That was driven by that principle, right? He engaged us.
Mr. Hampton is wonderful.
Yes, and also his vice principal, Mal Edwards. And the big part about that is a lot of people wanted to see that shut down. Everybody wanted to tear the system down. And God knows there should be some reform. There should be some removal in instances. But we have to do something about what currently exists. Because every day, whether we think it's good or bad, whether we want to tear it down or not, it still exists. And our children have to walk through those doors. So what Quest has done is decided to directly target those schools that have issues. And with Ms. Cox's help, we've been able to identify other places and other areas. Now, I will say that COVID-19 and the distance learning, it threw a hurdle in the way, right? I mean, but we'll talk more about that through the question process. But we're finding ways to be able to move past that. And the virtual environment has really afforded us the opportunity to at least continue the professional development within the schools. And when we're working with the youth, we do distance learning contacts with them. Just the other day, I actually met with our first kid, and he's a young man now. I mean, he was a little 11-year-old with dreads and adorable when I first met him, and bad as all get out. And I had a chance to sit down and talk with him. He's nothing we've done. He's made choices himself through the skills he's learned to be able to apply them. And it just gives further credence to the idea that our kids are capable. And when people can see them as being capable, they'll live up to that. But if they see them as where we know traditionally they have been seen, they'll live up to that as well. So that's why we really embrace this concept and forward the concept of acceptance. And that's really defined in the sense of everybody has inherent worth, respect the choices of these families, and show them the respect that's due, right? Stay strength-based in that process. Don't focus on what they can't do, focus on what they can. And lastly, find a way to not define their existence by some book you read that told you what that culture was. See who that human being is across from you and show empathy and learn what their worldview is and their perspective is, and use that to drive the way you educate our children, and also the way that you show and honor our parents. Because we sit in a state right now where we're asking our parents in distance learning to engage their students in learning. How can they do that effectively when they were shortchanged in their education? Mm-hmm. And then their parents were shortchanged in their education. And then you want to point the finger and turn around and say, well, they need to do more. Well, you can't get blood from a turnip, right? And so over the years, you've been handing us just the entrails of animals, but you want us to put together a 5-course meal on the back end of it. So I'm sorry, I get a little on a tangent. I'll calm down a little bit and I'll wait for the questions, Ms. Herbert.
I am grateful for you, Reggie, and for you, Kearry, for being who you are. You're being yourself fully and wholly in spaces where Black men are lacking in these spaces. And so for you all to be leading this conversation for the betterment of our students, our children, and to edify parents in this way is amazing, right? And I just want to put that out there, that we need people like you all and Miss Washington in schools and leading these conversations and not coming in after the fact, right? Other people have made a mess of things, but to lead the conversation. So I'm grateful for you all being here. And I want to pass it to Jendai, who's working diligently behind the scenes to put together a beautiful picture of what we've been talking about tonight. So I want to give him an opportunity to explain what he's working on and what he's heard. I think you're on mute if you're speaking.
Thank you for the reminder.
No worries.
You guys can hear me now. All right. So essentially, I love this topic because education is, when you think about the issues in our society, a lot of it deals with our ability to be educated and where that stems from. And when we talk about, well, okay, you guys pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all these things they all tie in together, but education is a huge part of it. If you start off at 10 years old already tripping over barriers, and we have to get to the root of the problem. So education, the school system being a huge part of it, and just really trying to take away from what Kearry and Reggie was saying. Sarah, I have a lot of your information on sketch notes. I will be putting that up there as well, and putting some of your profile images in there so we can see your lovely faces and character. But essentially, I love this tie-in from school and the prison system, that pipeline. Huge problem. I myself was diagnosed in kindergarten with ADD, and I don't know how many kids I know with Black and brown skin that were diagnosed with having ADD because we weren't being taught in the way that works best for us. And I actually went to a reunion for my middle school, and there were so many kids that went up there like, these 3 Black teachers that were in the school helped build confidence in me so that I can go on and be amazing in life. Without those people, man, it would have sucked. So to have Kearry and Reggie in these schools, to have Sarah in these schools is tremendously important. Professional development rather than going to prison, regulating emotions and empathy instead of emotional instability, working with parents instead of blaming parents, building instead of tearing down. That's huge. And then being targeted in your energy as an assistant to the students. I love what Kearry said about meeting them where they're at. That's a huge part of youth education, and even as parents. And so the fact that you focus on parents, that's like one of the the Achilles tendons that we tend to forget about. And I appreciate the fact that you do.
Thank you for sharing from
Yes,
your perspective. I want to give the listeners an opportunity to share maybe a few words in the chat box about like maybe some things that are standing out for you, or maybe some things that you're sitting with about the conversation that we've had thus far. And maybe just in the chat briefly, just add some words, and then maybe Jendai can illustrate those words that you have. Carol, absolutely. I love the transference of discussion to art. And Jendai speaking from the heart about how this is so relevant to his experience. Absolutely. Anyone else want to share some words that are standing out to them, or maybe they're sitting with, kind of chewing on? And as you're thinking of the words that you have in mind, I encourage you throughout the conversation to continue to kind of put those in the chat. And we're gonna move on to the second portion of this conversation. We have a set of questions. Awesome. Kelsey says, I feel so lucky to be here at this seminar and so excited to support the work you're doing in our schools. I've just been thinking about how many children aren't being taught in the way they need to be taught. And I'm so glad you all are working with our community. Absolutely. Thank you, Kelsey. So we're gonna move to the question portion. And the first question for our panelists, and I'll have Ms. Washington take a stab at it, and then maybe Kearry and Reginald take a stab at it. What are the most critical decisions we must make to ensure justice for the marginalized students of color and low-income families? Let me read that one more time. What are the most critical decisions we must make to ensure justice for marginalized students of color and low-income families?
So when I saw this question, first thing that came to mind is how we talk, because we always say there's an achievement gap. There's no achievement gap. There's opportunity gaps. There's resource gaps, like those kind of things. So change the way we talk, build those relationships, give that feeling that you're willing to go all out for kids. Because when a kid knows that you're really there for them, they're going to be their best. So have that grace and really build connections with the community, because our kids are in the community half of the time. So just really getting to know the community and being in the community. And then I think for families is just getting proper resources, helping parents find resources, and don't give us the resources that are overwhelming, meaning nowadays there's resources where you got to apply online. Parents don't know how to do a lot of stuff on the computer. So why the application has to have 50 questions, they got to be online, they got to click here, give their arm, their leg, and their liver. So we need resources that are that parents can access. And just basically continue to give parents knowledge, because I think Reggie was saying too, with distance learning, a lot of parents don't know how to do all of that. So even just helping our parents get those computer classes, and just, just giving parents proper resources that are useful and helpful, and just changing how we talk, because what we say is very important. My grandma always said this little red thing in our mouth can really do some damage. So just how we talk. So that's what I have.
Thank you for giving really practical and tangible things for people to do, because I think sometimes, and I tell educators that I work with, like, we gotta get, at some point we have to get back to the basics, right? To reach each other as human beings. And this is not rocket science. What you said, Ms. Washington, is not rocket science. It is not, you do not need to go to the highest college to learn these things. Some of this stuff is really common sense. So I appreciate you bringing that perspective, because we have some new educators in here. We also have some seasoned veteran folks that have some stake in the game, and they have been at it for a long time. We have a comment that says, as a new educator, I feel so grateful for your knowledge and guidance, how to best serve our youth. And we know that there are some people that are not from the community or don't share the similar backgrounds as students. And so it's important for us to give them those nuggets. So thank you, Ms. Washington. Mr. Reggie and Mr. Kearry, did you want to add to that question? What are the most critical decisions we must make to ensure justice for marginalized students of color and low-income families?
Thank you for that really good question. A few things come to mind. The first, I would say that we need to be intentional about learning to lean on one another and understanding that our wealth and our navigating through this educational terrain depends on us, right? And I feel like we sometimes depend on an exterior driver to put us in a position to do what we need to do and what we're capable to do on our very own. The second thing I would say would be was around accountability and figuring out very strategic ways to hold our districts accountable for the disparities that we're seeing, and to also hold our community leaders accountable as well. Our preachers, our politicians, our teachers, and ourselves. And just figuring out ways to hold ourselves accountable so that we can reach the end that we all want for ourselves. And lastly, I would say to start to be intentional about teaching children that being smart is cool, right? And that being smart and being white are not synonymous, right? And that you can show up your true self and get the kind of success that you want out of life. I think I've seen too often in my experience where I would have a child where I'm having a good conversation with, and I could just tell that they are a highly intelligent person, but then when their friends come around, it's like they try to dumb down their intellect. And I think that that's something that is really, really posing as a hurdle for us. And if we could come up with some effective ways to address that, I think we'd be in a better position.
All right, and the only thing I would add to that is, and when you pose the question, the we is what really stuck out to me. And like, which we are we talking about? Are we talking about as a community? Are we talking about as a school system? I think whichever we we're talking about, it boils down to, I think the most critical decision is to start to figure out how we can get more teachers of color into a classroom. It is a completely self-fulfilling prophecy the way it's set up right now. We know from social learning that you learn from what you observe, and you'll mimic what's modeled for you. And if I, as a Black child, never see someone that looks like me or sounds like me in that role, then how will I ever aspire to be in that role? And so that will continue on. And the reason why that is so incredibly large is through our research, and what we found is that in other regions where there are teachers of color, a larger percentage of teachers of color, a lot of these disparities aren't as drastic. They aren't as extreme. George Floyd's death was a horrible situation, but it actually had a powerful element of exposing the fact that Minnesota matches up with my home state of Mississippi when it comes to education and a lot of other disparities when it comes to people of color. But even within those systems in that process, it's a recognition that we need more teachers of color, and it needs to be an intentional effort to create more teachers of color here. If it's from going out and reaching in other states, we often hear the phrase of, well, just Black folks don't really sign up to be teachers, or, and that's a lot of roles in systemic oppression and systemic racism where they say we just don't want to do it, when in actuality, they ain't looking for us. Because if you want to look, we ain't hard to find. There's HBCUs throughout this entire country, many of them teaching educations where they spit out teachers at a high volume. We could easily tap into them and bring them into this area. But we also, if we choose to do that, if we make that decision to make that conscious effort, we need to create a welcoming environment for them, a supportive environment, so whereby they won't be brought into the system. And if they don't assimilate, if they don't fall into the line of what current practices are, they get shoved out, right? We need to create a support network for those new Black teachers to be able to have them sustain and grow, and then bring in more and more cohorts of them until, at least in the metro area, our workforce begins to look like the people they serve. So that's the only thing I would add to what Kearry said.
I think it's so important, and you all are choosing your words, and there's something important to say about language, right? So when we talk about there are no Black teachers, or we haven't been able to find Black teachers, we have to think about the language that we're using being a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And Heather in the chat room talks about language, and they agree that the language in the classroom can often be weaponizing. So not only from the child's perspective, but even as we're raising up young people to become teachers or to become learners or students. And so I think that that's an important point, and I didn't want to skip over that. Lynn also has a question before I move to the next question around the George Floyd Square, right? And how do we increase Minneapolis funding for stable homes, stable schools? The program overperforms and should be supported as foundational. I'm not sure if we want to move to that question or if we want to come back to that, but I want you all to kind of sit with that one, and then we'll move to the question that we have planned, and then Lynn will get back to your question, because I think that that's a good one. So the question that we have up next is like, who is making the greatest advancements in educational justice, and what are the what are they doing, right, to make them so successful?
Well, the first people that come to mind when you pose that question is there's a young man by the name of Elijah Norris Holiday, who is doing some work locally for the ADOS community. And for those of you who don't know what that stands for, is African descendants of slaves, right? So he has these workshops where he's teaching students how to build community as they are being emotionally intelligent at the same time. There's also a newly launched Minnesota Parent Union, which I think is super cool, and that's headed by Mr. Rashad Turner. And that's just a space for parents to gain any kind of advocacy work that they may need, any kind of guidance that they may need to help navigate the educational terrain. Also, we're excited about the expansion of the newly elected members of the Minneapolis School Board, Ms. Sharon El-Amin and Adriana Cirillo, I believe. And those are two people that we have done some extensive work with in the past, and to see their names now on the MPS School Board is very, very beneficial to us.
And then I wanted to say, and I just couldn't wait for this question, is I think MPS is doing a great job. So they had, well, we did it was our second mental health kickoff, but this time it was an anti-racism professional development. And so it was time to train staff on how to treat each other and also treat their families. Minneapolis has acknowledged that there is some systemic racism, and they're just trying to dismantle that. And Associate Superintendent Cox has done a great job, and Senior Eric Moore, his department is working on the climate framework, meaning how people treat each other, making sure that the staff is feeling welcome, community members are feeling welcome. They're making sure that every school got the same resources. They're getting away from the white supremacy kind of thing. You know, they're getting away from that. They're working really hard. We just got a new African-American mental health manager. And I'm really proud of Minneapolis because they're acknowledging some things has to change. And I just did a video for them today about the climate framework, and they're looking to get more perspective from the community, from the students. And then they also do something called PPE, Parent Participatory Evaluation. And it's majority African-Americans, Latinos, and Natives. And there's a meeting tonight, and I'm gonna be doing that program, but I'll be acting as a mentor. Minneapolis is they're rocking right now, and I'm proud. And I say that with a smile So yeah, I think they're doing good. They got healing spaces for the teachers. They're really working hard on trying to change things and change that dynamic. And I think the superintendent is doing all that he can. So I say MPS got it, and they're doing their best, and they're gonna keep rocking. So that's my think.
Yeah, and
Ms. Washington, can you share who did the anti-racist training? Do you remember?
Our school, so I'm on the mental health team. So it was me, Associate Superintendent Cox, Dr. Mark Sanders, Kathy, one of the social workers, and Matthew. So I presented twice, and Derek Francis. So we put together some slides. We put together some information, because here's the thing. A lot of white folks and Black folks too, we have our own bias, right? And so we broke out in different groups. It was a safe space. And it was just a time to basically get rid of that Minnesota nice, because that's the problem in Minnesota, which we have that Minnesota nice, kind of too fake. But it was time to just really be honest and get straight to the point. And so it was really nice. It was a lot of clinicians. And also Minneapolis is expanding their mental health. So there's 76 schools, and 52 schools have school-based services, but they're expanding that also for the healing, because the community then had so many shootings, deaths. So they're really trying to make sure that families is getting the support, students is getting the support. A few Harrison students got murdered, and Minneapolis was like, we got to get someone over there to be in person with these families, and what can we do? So I think that is a huge step. And again, I think it's very, very, very big that they're understanding and acknowledging there is systemic racism within the system, and it does need to be dismantled. And that's the only way they can help these kids, is if they first start in-house.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And
Reggie, were you saying something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the thing of there are a lot of people, good people doing a lot of good work. And we know that historically there's been a lot of good people doing a lot of good work. The big part about that is a lot of this is an installation process, or it's like an event that takes place. What I would encourage everybody to do is build some kind of sustainability model around whatever you're implementing that's having some kind of effect. Monitor what you're doing and be able to report back what you're doing. Like that project we did with Elijah and other things, we made sure that we put together tangible evidence of what we were accomplishing, but also develop ways to be able to expand beyond just your scope, right? Agencies, there's so many smaller ones, and there was a large influx of cash right after the George Floyd incident into a lot of different agencies. It's about managing that properly and making it more than just an event. The professional development within schools and working with different people. It's one thing to have a conversation. It's another thing to develop skills around how to be able to address those issues, and then come up with ways to monitor people's progress and development in those skills. And so all the good work, I would not diminish in any way, shape, or form. It needs to take place. There are a lot of agencies that are doing a lot of good things. And they really took that moment and it inspired them. It drove their behavior. The thing is, we have to sustain this movement far beyond this moment. And that's only going to happen when we move past discussion into action, and then monitoring of that action.
That's good. That's good. I want to give people an opportunity to engage in a different way before we move to our next question. And we have a poll that we want the participants to take. It's going to pop up on your screen. Grace, if you can cue it up. We just want you to answer these questions, right? The first one is, the education system needs to be improved to accommodate the needs of youth in my community. And then the second question is, youth in my neighborhood need more opportunities to get involved. Awesome. Grace, is there a way that we can show the results of that?
Yep. Give me 1 second here. Last call. If you haven't gotten your results in, please do now. Otherwise, I'm going to end the poll and show everybody the results.
So a strong number of you said you strongly agree that the education system needs to be improved to accommodate the needs of youth in my community. And about 32% said agree. No one said disagree or strongly disagree. All right. So the second question, youth in my neighborhood need more opportunities to get involved. And this is over half said strongly agree at a strong 73%. And about 27% of you all agreed. No one disagreed or strongly disagreed. Thank you all for sharing your perspective. And I think that's a great segue into really like, how are we doing in this time, right? We all know that we're in a pandemic, and some of us know that we've been experiencing pandemics, right? With an S, multiple, plural pandemics in the educational system. And so how do you think COVID-19 is affecting the educational equity? So Ms. Washington, if you wanted to take a stab at that question, and then we'll hear from Reggie and Kearry.
I think it's creating a lot of barriers for families. I think a lot of children of color is falling behind. I think our crime rate has really went up. I mean, there's someone getting killed like every other day. I just think it's really sad. I don't think parents have enough tools to do what they have to do with their kids. I just think it's sad. I mean, it's just sad. It's scary. It's disappointing. It's all over the place. But my main thing is our kids are falling behind. They're not even doing school. Like, some of the kids are getting killed during school hours, you know, or they're doing carjackings. I never seen this many carjackings, and I'm from Minnesota, North Side, born and raised, 6 and 11 events, and I ain't never seen nothing like this. You know, so the crime has went up. I know parents need tools and resources. And every time I go to bed, I think of ways like, how can I reach this parent? Do I got to be at the nail shop? Like, what do we got to do? You know what I mean? Because it's just really created a lot of crime. It's a lot of crime, a lot of heartache, and the community needs a lot of healing. We're at risk. And even though we got a new president, like you guys were saying earlier, it's so much stuff that needs to be done because it ain't over yet, you know, so.
Thank you.
I'll chime in. In addition to what Ms. Washington shared, I view this time as kind of an expansion of the already horrific achievement gap that we have in this state. And I say that because families that have the means to educate their children are still educating their children. I mean, there's schools out here that are going 5 days a week, full time, aren't having even a hybrid option that are educating families, children, I should say. And just the consistent lack of access to the internet and computers, I think, is weighing in on our families. And just the overall reduced learning time and how that equates to student learning. And I think above all, what we need to be cognizant of is the plan that needs to be taking place now around what we're going to do when we do return back to school, right? Like what kind of things are going to be set in place to make up the ground that was lost, right? Are we going to extend the summer times? Are we going to extend the school days? Are we going to be more focused on personalized learning? Things of that nature, just so we could come up with a proactive approach to the ground that has been lost thus far with COVID-19.
Yeah, and everything they just said, and the big part about it is recognizing that what started out as a gap has turned into a chasm. And at the rate we're going, if some changes aren't made soon, it's going to turn into the Grand Canyon. We know that there are a lot of kids, especially in the special ed realm, where there's not a clear protocol or clear expectation or just plans or strategies of how to address those kids' needs, right? They already had needs to begin with. How are we mitigating those within this virtual environment? Move beyond that, just the ability to connect with students. We talked about the lack of Wi-Fi and internet connection, things of that nature, but a lot of the actual staff that I've been engaging with, it's nearly impossible to be able to get kids on the phone or and make any kind of contact with them outside of those classroom hours. And then even with that, I don't want to minimize the fact that the teachers are making they're having to learn on the fly and make some critical adjustments. And so really what it boils down to is COVID-19 has impacted that gap in a significant way. And my fear, my concern is that we're just kind of pushing it off, right? We're punting it. A lot of the kids that used to have behavioral issues for us, we don't have to worry about that right now because all the teacher got to do is mute them, right? Or just, expel them from the class and things of that nature and then deal with it later. Well, that loss of time in education and all of those different things only magnify and increase the issues that were there before. And like Kearry said, at some point, right, you can pay us now or pay us later, but at some point you're gonna have to deal with this issue. And what I would like to see is a significant investment in addressing those issues, and not just a symbolic one, right? But cash infused and strategies employed to be able to bring these kids at least to slow the drop, right? To slow the attrition, so that when we do return to a face-to-face model, we're not starting 25 steps backwards compared to where we were before COVID kicked in.
And then also, I just want to say too, Reggie, made me think, a lot of parents don't, or a lot of families don't have the luxury of a quiet room. So the kids who are getting online, it might be 5 kids in a house. They don't have the luxury to have one kid in this room or the kid over here, or the parents can afford headphones. And half of the kids are highly mobile. They're homeless. And then the other problem is the teachers are frustrated and they feel like, well, it's distance learning. I really ain't got to deal with them hands-on, but really you do, because these kids will mess around and you'll be the next one being the jack victim, because that is really, these kids are really turning to crime, and they're doing all of this because of the lack of resources. If families had what they need and the parents were able to wake up and be like, okay, I got this, we're all good, these kids wouldn't even be out here doing all that, and I think it all, to me, I feel like the parents have the lack of resources, so the kids are just really out of control. The parents can't handle it. They don't know what to do. COVID has really shown a whole lot. And sometimes I'm scared to leave my house at a certain time of night because it is starting to be scary and dangerous. It's a mess. We're in a real mess. We're in a real funk.
And so we know what the issues are. And COVID just simply unmasked even more, right? Before you could throw the blanket on the bed and not necessarily cover it with sheets. Well, now we know that it's raw and it's real and it's out there. So there are solutions, though. There's things that we can do. In cities, like in California, many cities, what they've done is they've taken buses, like vans, and they've turned them into hotspots and taken them into what they know are low-income areas. And so they make it accessible. They have people on there monitoring so they can make sure that they have the same security protocols as they would within the school system. But then those kids in those areas are able to access that hotspot, at least during the actual class time, right? They make sure in many other areas, like in Arizona, they're providing kids, making sure that every kid has a tablet or some form or equipment to be able to get online, to be able to actually follow through. Right. And I see it as an opportunity for teachers, whereby if I got a classroom full of kids and then they just shuffle from one topic to the next, with this virtual environment, there's an opportunity for you to be able to create breakout rooms and engage kids in a smaller way, right? Give them tasks and be able to work through it. It's just really being mindful and strategic and intentional about the approach that you take. And there's an opportunity within this for them to build even deeper relationships. You're at home, the child, for those who can get online, and they're at home and their parents are there, there's an opportunity within that to be able to connect with the parent, because rather than waiting for them to come to teacher-student night, you could ask if they're available to just check in for a moment. I realize that is an additional layer and is extra work added into a teacher's actual time. And at the same time, we got to do what we can with what we got. And rather than looking at just all the negatives and all the things that aren't there, let's look at potential opportunities within this to be able to do some things, to build some of those relationships that we otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to do.
I would say, to piggyback on that comment, there has been some success stories shared with us around COVID and how parents are having to step up now and be the teacher, and how they are now feeling empowered, right? So that when face-to-face time comes back, I've even heard parents say that they're thinking about homeschooling their kids now because of the experience that COVID has landed on us. So there is a positive side to it as well. It's not as popular, but there are those stories that are out there as well.
And I have also heard really good stories around students that really struggle with their behavior because of all of the distractions, and are now able to focus because they're at home in the comfort of their own home. And there's not someone that's at them for maybe, banging their table, right? Or with their pencil, right? Or there's no one to say you got to leave because you have a hat on, right? And so I think that we should address all of the things, but we should not lose focus that there are some success stories here too. So I want to pivot to the questions because they're kind of racking up in the chat room, if you haven't noticed. And some really good comments. Amy shares that we need universal internet access. It's a pity that the plan Minneapolis put together to try for that was not considered acceptable when it was offered, not just for school kids, but for neighborhoods. Absolutely. Heather says, or ask, strategic planning is key here. What special programming at the building level can we advocate for? Kearry, do you want to take a stab at that, or maybe Miss Washington?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
The question is, talking about strategic planning, right? What special programming at the building level can we advocate for? And I'm not sure who the we is, like Reginald asked before, like who is the we?
I would say advocate for any type of trainings that are skill-based, right? I think far too often we have kind of gotten used to the trainings that just peel back scabs and get us caught up in our emotions, and they just kind of leave us in that state, right? So I would advocate for any type of trainings at a broad district level that will actually give the school personnel tools that they can use to better engage our students.
And I'd go further and say a special program would be one to help fill the gap for those parents who were shorted in their education, right? A safe space for them to be able to engage and learn and develop so that they can support their kids' education, right? I don't know of any agency or any school district that actually are looking at that in a direction. We need to work to build our parents' confidence around being able to support their kids in their learning. So whatever programs you can put together in that instance, whether it's virtual or however you get it across, I think that'll go a long ways toward really helping to at least stem the tide on the drift that's taking place with our kids.
I agree with both of you guys. And also just even the same way how the schools do the SEL for kids, because I think parents can benefit from that social and emotional learning, and even offer a lot of those computer classes. I think it would have been so good when virtual started if they offered some free computer classes somehow, some way, because that would have gave parents confidence too, So I agree with everything you guys said.
Absolutely.
Yes,
We have another question from Lynn. How do we increase the Minneapolis funding for stable homes, stable schools? The program overperforms and should be supported as foundational.
I won't sit and pretend to say I know exactly what that is, but the only way to increase anything is by being intentional about it, right? I mean, agencies can't continue to rely on private funders or donations and things of that nature, because more times than not, those donors, they shift. And it's not to say that they're fickle, but their aim tends to move in the direction of whatever is the most relevant thing, and sometimes something that was really popping a minute ago, because there's something new out there that has a little more impact, they tend to drift in that direction. That's no fault of their own, right? I mean, it's their money. They should move it in the direction that they feel they'll get the biggest impact. There needs to be local funding, state and government funding of programs that we know are working, and with some oversight attached to it as well. Not just people, you know, telling some good stories and pulling folks together and taking a picture, right, or giving out that feel-good story, but there should be some state and local and even federal funding directly tied into programs that we know are making an impact and addressing the issues in our community and in education and housing, whichever direction it's aimed at.
Lynn has added some clarifying information in the chat to include stable homes equals schooling. Homelessness means classroom/remote learning, and those young people get into the prison industrial complex.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my response to it in a sense. I mean, whatever we know is working, there needs to be a city, state, federal funding and backing of it, and not just relying on donations and things of that nature. Because a lot of the agencies that are targeting those areas, that are dealing and addressing with those issues, they do become beholden unto the donors, because that's where their funding comes from. And like I said, if the donors, if their aim shifts, then no matter your good intentions and the best effort, right, funding dries up, and you can only do what you can do within those areas based on the funding that you have.
Anyone else have anything to add to that question? I see that Grace has put in the chat too, to learn more about stable homes, you can click on that link, as well as she provided a description that says that this program helps students and their families stay in their homes or get a home if they are currently unhoused. I think that, you know, we oftentimes in education get so into our work that we forget that all of the acronyms that we use as educators is in a universal language. Only us know it. So I thank you, Grace, for adding that. That's good, and that'll be a helpful resource for people that aren't familiar with that particular program. Heather asks, can you discuss more about the prison to school to prison pipeline and how that's connected to your work?
Right, I'd be glad to. A lot of times that term is thrown out there, and it's thrown out there to like blanketly apply in a lot of different ways. What we look at, what we know from all the studies that are out there, this isn't studies done by private agencies. This is done by the federal government, Department of Education as well, that the earlier kids are tapped into that EBD label or special education, it begins a process, right? It also begins to label that child, and they start getting treated in a certain way based on that label. We know that kids who are considered to be special education, who aren't in like a 504 with like a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis, they start being seen as the problem child, right? They become the water cooler kid inside the building, where when teachers are talking among them, say, oh my God, you got Johnny this year? And so what happens is their behavior gets monitored way more severely. And then they end up getting suspended more times than other students as a whole, right? And those suspensions expose them to things out in the community that the school would prevent them from being around, right? So it puts them out and make them vulnerable to people who actually are engaged in things that aren't necessarily healthy. Now, beyond that, we know that kids that have the EBD label, they end up getting put in the classrooms where they're not getting a full education. And I know one system in particular, to try to mitigate their disparities with suspensions, they ended up moving to, they were sent home from school, right? Either way, they're still being put out into a community where there's people out there that can take advantage of those kids and have them involved in activities and behaviors that aren't healthy and lead to criminal action, right? And so when it comes to the school to prison pipeline, if we don't begin to address suspensions from school, right? The overrepresentation of kids of color and marginalized groups in special education, especially EBD, we know that pipeline is just going to broaden more and more. Hopefully that answered your question. And if it didn't.
If I could piggyback really quick on something that you said, Reggie, around the EBD students being suspended more than the regular students. And I just wanted to add to that point that once you become a child that's labeled with EBD, your IEP, your individual education plan, is supposed to pose as a buffer for you not to be suspended as much, right? Because you now have this document that's saying you have a disorder, but that's just not always the case. It's most likely not the case in most situations. So I just wanted to add that piece, that the IEP is there to protect them, but a lot of times it has a counterproductive effect.
And you know why? And you know why it doesn't protect a lot of kids? And this is why I love Associate Superintendent Cox, because I remember one day we was in a SEAC meeting and all the African-American parents did not know their rights. See, but if parents knew their rights, it will protect them. My kids had IEPs and EBD. Let me first of all, let me tell you this. One of my daughters graduated from Wayzata High School, had 2 kids in Wayzata and 2 in Minneapolis. When I say I navigated the bougiest system and made sure not now one of my kids better got suspended. And see, I knew how to do that because I knew what I was doing. See, but a lot of parents are not savvy enough to do that. They don't know how to go into the meeting and say, look, this is my child's right, and I'm going to write in paragraph so-and-so. I want these accommodations, because kids with EBD, you can say, hey, if little Marcus forget his pencil, he is not to get a consequence. Please have a pencil for little Marcus. My daughter Ashley had behavioral and ADHD, but I made it to where she can leave the class 5 minutes early, so she ain't got to be in the hall, and she can also get to class a little late because of her disability. But if parents knew their rights and were taught their rights, their kids wouldn't get suspended. But I never forget, I said, Rochelle, I don't like that these parents don't know what they're doing. So 3 years ago, we started doing parent engagement sessions, because I wanted a session every year or twice a year, and we had topics to help parents know their rights or teach them how to be those savvy parents.
Yeah, and the big thing too is knowing your rights and advocating for your rights is sometimes a little bit separate. And so that's why we work with the parents to first help them learn how to advocate for their kids, but we also show up to the meetings with them before COVID actually kicked in, and now virtually, where we will sit in and support them, because more times than not, and this is not a slam on anybody, but what ends up happening is there's 5 or 6 school staff on the other side of the table, and there's one parent sitting over there who may be stressed out because they had to take off from work and things of that nature, and there's no one there to really support them. Now, I want to be clear, we don't speak for the parent in the room. We're just there to make sure that they get heard, right? That's why we do all of those role plays and walk them through what's likely to be said and how they can respond, and reference the rules and the rights and the laws that they can then hold the school's feet to the fire for in those interactions. But we don't go in and represent the kid, or and we don't try to supplant the parent as the authority within their household, right? We go in and we make sure that their voice is heard during those meetings.
You know what, Reggie, I just thought of a funny story, and I go to meetings with parents if they want me to. I'll never forget, my daughter was at Henry, and I had monitor and compliance. I came in with my neighbor, Pacer. I had Side before she left the district. I had about 10 people. You should have seen their face, because they didn't know that a little young single mom like me knew all of that. But I always try to encourage parents, you have rights. The meeting is your meeting. Don't let them send you no agenda. You make the agenda. This is your meeting. You're the boss.
That's good. I used to work at a school with mostly Latinx parents, and I had a parent meeting, and what they told me is that you are the teacher. I send my kid here for you to teach. I am the parent. They're at home and I parent. And so it's important that, one, we as educational systems being intentional about engaging them and empowering, using empowering language to say that we are co-teachers in this work, and that I don't replace you, and you have is not our role as a teacher to replace you. But we want you to be engaged in this to advocate for your student. And so I think that it's both and, where we provide the resources and the tools, as well as be open to the parents being engaged, as you were, Miss Washington, and as you all work for your parents, Kearry and Reggie. So thank you for adding that perspective. I want to get to Jendai real quick so that he can showcase what he's been working on during this rich conversation. And then we're gonna probably have room for maybe one more question, and then we'll close out for tonight.
All right, let me pull you in here a little closer. Hopefully you can see it. Am I on mute still? No. Sorry, I'm trying. All right, so Sarah updated your profile. We got a rough image here of all the things you do. You're an amazing person and mother. All the things you're advocating for: inclusion, changing laws, parental tools. Deciding was one of the main key points that you guys talked about, how we talk, being intentional, accountability, and independent from other people trying to, or I should say, relying on others to make the change that we want. Modeling, that is a huge thing. When you study the Bible or you study changing your life, it says model the person you're around, or the person you want to be if you want to be that person. So teachers of color, that's a huge thing. And then the sustainable model, we go into moving, let's see here. Moving beyond discussion, planning, action, monitor, report. That is all the new that has been implemented, aside from this thing that you guys, I kind of, that's my takeaway from the conversation as a whole. And that is, I think, I hear a lot of geniuses, and I've been involved in conversations with Bush Foundation about individualized learning. What is it called? There's another organization, they talked about free schooling and resources like computers and internet. And it all came back to like very bureaucratic conversations on how to get it done. But I see it as each individual nonprofit or organization is operating like it's a separate Power Ranger. And the adversary that we're going up against is massive. And the only way that the Power Rangers can defeat that massive enemy is when they come together as one, fighting the same battle, fighting the same enemy. And so if there was a way that we can combine resources and fight the same battle together without having all the bureaucracy, I think we'd be able to do a lot. I think about my own daughter. She's obviously being homeschooled right now. And the thing that she does the most is she's on her computer and she's playing Roblox or she's building on Sims. And I just think about technology being used as a tool to teach and for them to have fun at the same time right now in this pandemic, because obviously not a whole lot is going to change. If there was a way, and this is going back to the conversation with Bush Foundation and the other organization, was basically a Pandora, a technology that can be tailored to each individual student's needs and something that they can have fun with. If we can pull resources and money together to be able to afford something like that right now, I think we might be able to pull some kids in. I don't know, but that's just my takeaway. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So I want to give people an opportunity to say some parting words. And maybe those parting words can center around maybe the last question. Like, I think that there are various levels of people on this call that have engaged in different ways in terms of education of young people. Some are parents, some are educators, some are community members that are concerned about the world as they see it. And so the question is really like, what are some action steps that are the most urgent that people can do today, right now? And there's also some talk about like really showing up, right? In public hearings, November 16th and at 10 a.m. That's one way that people can show up. What are some other ways or action steps that people can take?
The first one is first seek to understand before being understood. You got to do we as individuals have to do our own work, right, to deal with our own issues so we can show up and come together in a way, right? I mean, it seems Pollyanna-ish in a lot of ways, but I think like one of the comments in there about the whole idea of holding the feet to the fire and the us versus them thing, I don't know if it's so much an us versus them or like a separation of things. It's just one group has been at a level of control for a while, and the other group has had power. They just didn't recognize that they had it. So we as a community need to work on developing our own strengths and our awareness of the power and things that we have, right? Tap into mental health and therapy. I know a lot of us have experienced a significant amount of trauma with a lot of the different things that have happened since May. And yet we're not addressing it. And a lot of times they may manifest itself in inappropriate ways and come across in unhealthy ways. So I think one of the biggest action items is to do some internal work so that we can, when the opportunity affords itself, or when we create the opportunity for ourselves, so that we can actually take advantage of it in a way that's productive and moving forward. And it isn't so much about us versus them, but if they have had a sense of authority for so long, we got to get ourselves to have that sense of agency as well, right? We can't wait for somebody else to give it to us.
And I would just say, get involved, get educated. There's so many things you can do. For example, come to the Special Education Advisory Council, come and hear what's going on in Minneapolis, help be a part of different changes. Be more involved in your kids' school. Join the site councils, please. They're doing it virtual. I'm on 2 site councils, and I don't have kids in either school. I'm in Harrison's and Franklin's, but join your site councils. Just get involved, because the PPE cohort is really good. They teach parents how to collect data. So just get involved. There's a thing called Partners in Policy. They're always looking for parents. I graduated class of 33, but Partners in Policy will educate you on the IDA, on just everything. It takes you way back to 1960 something. Get involved, get out here, get your voices heard. If you don't know, Google it, ask about it, just educate yourself. I think in a day I go to I think I had 4 different conferences. I'm really big on mental health. That's been my passion. So I'm always educating myself and trying to figure out what's the new or what's going on now. But just educate yourself. Join the site councils. Come to SEAC. So get more involved. Ask questions.
I love it. I tend to go back to my response that I gave before around accountability. If you figure out what your drive is, you figure out what your aim is, and you hold those accountable that are standing in the way of you obtaining that. I mean, that's as simple as I can get. Also, to get involved with the community in multiple ways. We have a support group that we facilitate, and I can send you that information here, Grace, in a second so you can get it out to everybody. But we have a monthly support group where parents come and just share different success stories of how they've navigated the educational terrain, and just concerns, and just a space that's safe, that we can just kind of sharpen each other up. We partner with the Minnesota Disability Law Center, so we have that expertise there as well. So just things of that nature.
I want to thank you all for engaging in this really important conversation. And I want to urge you, as I pass it on to Tabitha, who's going to close us out, to put your platforms in which people can contact you, whether you use social media or websites that you have, put it in the chat so people can begin to look for your work and connect with you on a deeper level. So I want to thank you. And lastly, I want to answer that question just real briefly. I think it's important that we all start talking to the young people, right? And not being afraid to engage them in these conversations. I think even as my work requires us to constantly think about what tables aren't you sitting at. There's no reason why young people shouldn't be on this call. So I think that that's one way. Invite young people to the table. When you know that, you know, we're talking about them, they should be here. That's it. Go ahead, Tabitha.
Listen, again, who knew November 9th was going to be such a big and amazing day. I mean, shout out to you, Shanae, for doing an amazing job at moderating. We are so fortunate to have you be a part of the association's board. The panelists, I got to tell you, I've been over here like if I had popcorn, like, what did he say? What did she say? I have been enjoying myself, and in a real way, that the depth of knowledge and experience and humility and humanity that you brought to this conversation, I certainly know it will be a well-viewed session in the YouTube sphere when we get it posted. But really know that you have our deep gratitude and appreciation for saying yes to something that we had not done before. This is our first, what we hope is an annual Southside Summit, where we're really trying to bring different voices into the space for people to become more aware about how they might activate against key issues in our community, not because Kearry and Reggie and Sarah are experts by themselves, but because they have lived experiences and talents and gifts that they're willing to share, just like everybody else on this call. So we appreciate them so much for taking the time with us tonight. We definitely want to give a shout out to all the board members, whether they were present this evening as we kicked off the week or not. We certainly want to give a special thanks to the Graves Foundation, who sponsored this year's summit, and hopefully they will be a partner with us in years to come. Please, if you have not already looked at the full schedule for the week, do so at Southside Summit, mpls.org. You will see that we still have 4 more sessions for the rest of the week. On Wednesday, on the 11th, we will be covering equitable development and environmental justice. On Friday, we will be covering livability and safety alongside self-care and wellness. So a couple of big nights still yet to come with equally amazing panelists and moderators to get us through the evening. Everyone has been great. I saw a couple of people who came back for the second session tonight. You guys are amazing. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being willing to look at different ways that we can serve the community, again, beyond elections, beyond pandemics, and beyond very real crises. We might be in the midst of trials, but our community is still demonstrating that we are willing to be awakened by ideas so that we can be motivated to act together. We appreciate you, we see you. We wish everybody a wonderful evening, and we hope to see some of you back here, not necessarily same time, same channel, but on Wednesday and Friday for so much more. Thank you, Kearry. Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Shanae, for spending your evening with us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And Reggie, Rochelle was on the call. She said she loves you. So I just wanted to tell you that. And I saw you at Harrison before. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the community, you and your partner.
Yes, ma'am.
And thank you for having me, Tabitha. It was amazing. Now I am fit to relax. I am wore out.
Sarah, you truly, you got some fans after tonight. So I was surprised you gave out your personal email, child. So you better.
Girl, because I need them to contact me because I'm going to be like, what you need?
No, everybody did such an amazing job. Thank you for sharing of yourselves, of your time. Just truly wonderful all around. This was a wonderful, wonderful start to the summit. We could not have asked for a better group of panelists to share such deep wisdom and insight, alongside quite frankly, a moderator who was trying to steal some of y'all thunder at time, y'all, but I'll talk to her about it offline.